With the Arctic becoming a new frontline for the United States and Europe, can the European Union continue to rely on its traditional ally for its security? We ask the EU's foreign policy chief.
US has changed, that's very clear. Trust has been fractured, our transatlantic ties have taken a heavy blow. But on our side, we are willing to work with this. We don't want a conflict, we don't want a war. I mean, we have worries on our own.
But as Europe seeks to avoid a direct confrontation with the United States, are its leaders exaggerating the threat from Russia? We ask Latvia's foreign minister.
There always has to be a readiness and preparedness for various scenarios. That is the way allies work, that is the way NATO works. Russia has been identified as the most prominent and persistent threat to Euro-Atlantic security, but also to allied securities.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri in Tromsø, the Arctic capital in northern Norway. With recent moves by the Trump administration to acquire Greenland, a semi-autonomous Danish territory, the focus has shifted to Arctic security as European nations try to reframe their entire regional strategy. The EU foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas recently warned of a return to coercive power politics. We spoke with her on the sidelines of the Arctic Frontiers Conference here in Tromsø. Hi, Representative Kallas, thank you so much for joining me. You've repeatedly described Russia as, quote, a major security threat that has destabilized Europe and pushed it towards a reassessment of its defense posture. In the Arctic context, how much of a significant imminent threat is Russia today when you compare it to the more aggressive rhetoric and statements coming out of the United States?
Well, one is rhetoric, but the other thing is the military buildup. And we are here in the high north, where very close is Kola Peninsula, where you have, the military buildup of nuclear weapons, submarines, all this. The risks here are still coming from Russia.
But isn't that natural? I mean, after all, Russia controls more than 50% of Arctic territory.
That is true, but if you think that their bases here are really directed towards United States, towards Europe, these are high risks in high north.
What do you make of the United States pressures, threats, including tariff threats against EU members? How seriously do you take them?
It's clear that the transatlantic relations have changed, and we see, these unpredictable steps made every single day almost. I think with this 1 year, we have also learned how to adapt and what to, where to react and where not to. I think this is important for us. Of course, we believe in free trade, we believe in cooperation, so we want a good relationship with the United States.
But has trust completely broken down?
It has clearly fractured. Because this rhetoric is quite something that we haven't seen before. The problem with trust is that it's very easy to break, but it's much harder to build.
But how do you restore it with the Trump administration, given his repeated threats over Greenland?
I mean, from our side, we are, we have the goodwill to build the relationship, to keep the relationship, but it can't be one-sided. That's also very clear. So we are willing to work for this. United States is our biggest ally, has always been, and we want this cooperation to work.
But is that part of the problem? Because Donald Trump has repeatedly said that he respects power. Can you continue to play soft with someone like Donald Trump?
It poses challenges, definitely. I mean, how the rhetoric goes. But at the same time, it's important to, remain calm, really. Of course, we are building up our strength when it comes to our military strength, but it's also when it comes to our competitiveness, to be more powerful economically. And we also, I might add one thing, Europe has very strong soft power. I mean, if I go around the world, I think, a lot of countries are actually wanting to have, partnerships with us, to build with us, because we are the predictable and stable partner.
But it's raw power that works today, isn't it?
In geopolitics, yes, you have two ways to be a geopolitical power. One is raw military power, and the other thing is economic power.
Why isn't the EU more willing to use its economic power?
Well, because we want also good relationships. So we don't want a conflict. We don't want a war. I mean, we have worries on our own. We have Russia's full-scale war on the territory on the European continent. So this is the real threat. We have the economic coercive practices coming from China that are threatening our companies. So these are the real issues that we need to deal with. And there we also see that America is worried about the same things, and we offer cooperation.
But are you overemphasizing Russia and China at the expense of dealing more forcefully with your transatlantic ally, the United States?
No, I mean, this is the reality. I mean, it's a hot war in Europe, and that's why these are the threats, and also the economic coercive practices are something that everybody is complaining about because it is really impacting our companies, and if it is impacting our companies, it's also impacting our people. So we need to address this, but. To address this, we actually need partners because, these powers are too strong to take them on one-on-one.
But is the US still that reliable partner?
US has changed, that's very clear. And like I said, the trust has been fractured. Our transatlantic ties have taken a heavy blow. But on our side, we are willing to work with this.
How do you react to the NATO Secretary General's comments recently that Europe is not in a position to defend itself without the United States?
Well, we haven't been, and that's why we are really building up our defenses. I mean, European countries are spending record on defense, and this is increasing. I mean, defense industry is also ramping up production. So we are working in order to be stronger.
Can you ever catch up, though?
Well, we have the defense readiness roadmap that we want to, achieve in 2030. So, of course, 2030 is quite far, and we need to do more and faster right now in order to, be or work as a deterrent.
Do you believe that the EU will be better off without this US-led defense umbrella?
We are in NATO. I mean, 23 countries of European Union are also in NATO, where also America is. And America is very important to European security. And the transatlantic alliance is important to many of our member states. I mean, all of our member states, really. So, I wouldn't set that aside. But, making European countries in NATO and their defense stronger is also making NATO stronger.
How important is international law today? Because, as you know, there's a lot of fierce criticism directed towards the EU for not always dealing even-handedly with every abuse of international law.
Well, actually, I don't really, accept those accusations, because we have always raised the issue of international law. But what I want to say is that the world is changing, and it's not based or on the same rules that we have seen so far. If you look at history, then actually in every time when you have had big international crises, it's also a moment to develop international rules-based order further. If you think, we had the League of Nations, it didn't work properly, so United Nations now, it's not delivering how it was meant to be, because it was meant to prevent wars. Now, so we need to see what more can we do in regarding this. I mean, the international rules-based order has to really reflect the world also, that the Security Council has to have members that are from different parts of the world, and also there has to be accountability, because
But
that
is
is
there? Is
no,
there,
no,
though?
not. I mean, right now it doesn't work the way it was meant to be, and that's why I'm saying that there's a lot of countries in the world who want to work with us to develop it further, because the law of the jungle or the law where might makes right is not in the interest of the majority of the countries
But
in
it
the
does
world.
seem to work with weaker nations. But when it comes to the United States and its strong allies, there is a tendency, isn't there, by European leaders to give them a pass.
Well, I also read one book that was arguing that the international law has been an illusion, because actually it has always been that superpowers are abiding by different rules. But even in jungle, animals cooperate. So we really need to find the path, because if the majority of the countries in the world want some kind of rules to govern the world, so we can work with that, and then also address the issues of superpowers.
Can you work with that in a non-selective way? Sanctions for Russia, yes, but sanctions perhaps for Israel and others as well?
We have our own constraints, which is 27 democracies coming through with different historical backgrounds. And that is why, we haven't been always able to put, really strong steps also behind our, values. But we really need to work with that. And 27 democracies we still have. So that is the reality where we are living.
All right. High Representative Kallas, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So how do EU member states see the key challenges in the Arctic and beyond? We're joined by Baiba Braže, Foreign Minister of Latvia.
Foreign Minister Braže, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, why does Latvia, a non-Arctic Baltic state, care so much about security here in the Arctic?
Because security is interlinked and interdependable, and in the transatlantic space, that's the rule. So with the Arctic becoming more prominent also within NATO discussions, the EU is working on a new Arctic strategy. Obviously, we as a nation, as a country also have our view, and we are building our competence, knowledge, and so on and so forth. Our scientists have been engaging in the Arctic for a long time. We have always known that NATO's area of operations cover Arctic, big military exercises, cold response happening every 2 years. So it's very much about both using the opportunities to learn, to understand, but also to finding ways how to make sure that the first precondition, which is security and defense in the transatlantic space, remains.
When you look at the role of NATO today in securing the Arctic, Latvia is a NATO member, has been since 2004. You're a former NATO official. Do you feel that NATO has the governance, the strategy, the framework that is currently needed? Because you constantly referred to the Russian threat.
Correct. Russia has been identified as the most prominent and persistent threat to Euro-Atlantic security, but also to allied security, so to the countries. And here in the Arctic, obviously, Russian challenge has always been there since NATO was founded. The current Russian behavior with the aggression against Ukraine, with violating any principle of international law, any agreement, any sort of commitment, of course, NATO takes it seriously. We all nationally take it seriously. So that's why also here we have to take it seriously.
But here in the Arctic, though, does Russia present a direct, immediate threat, or is this being overstated?
There always has to be a readiness and preparedness for various scenarios. That is the way allies work, that is the way NATO works. And that's why we welcome also the announcement of SECURE for military planning for a mission in Arctic. It doesn't have to be, something that is overstated. I mean, it will always respond to real life situations, but that preparedness, that understanding, that working together with allies is a very welcome step.
To what extent can Europe continue to consider the United States as a reliable ally?
US is a reliable ally. It's a strategic ally for Europeans. And obviously, there have been public statements that have quite unnerved a number of countries within Europe, and that's why also we always say, okay, let's look if there are issues for any of the allies that they feel need to be discussed or that they feel have to be taken up. Among allies, we can always do that in dialogue, looking at what the issues are and find the best answers. So in that respect, I would say that loud public statements are not very conducive to sort of relationships or making sure that we find those best solutions. And in the same time, European defense, the need to invest more in European defense.
But why won't you take American threats and the aggressive rhetoric towards Greenland, in fact, the threats towards European allies on trade and tariffs, why won't you take it seriously enough? Why is Europe unwilling to stand up to Donald Trump? Is it because you are at such a disadvantage when it comes to defense and security?
I don't think I would describe any of that as a threat. When we look at specific issues, the principles of international law are very clear. Territorial integrity, sovereignty is the basis for preventing any type of tensions or conflicts or anything. That's in Africa, that's what African leaders say, because, if they start taking each other's borders, then the whole African sort of existence will
But international law is being violated.
Will be undermined.
But Foreign Minister, international law is being violated, not just in Africa, in the Middle East and elsewhere. Europe doesn't seem to have a problem when it is happening away from its own backyard.
I think Europe has been very clear on all those situations you mentioned, not only in the statements, but also in practical work, whether that's on the Middle East or elsewhere. But then, of course, having situations like in Venezuela, where, yes, we all tried to achieve the change, for more than 20 years, with a murderous regime that has been suppressing its people. And yes, we were all caught by surprise by the way the change was conducted. And when you look at the international law principles, of course, that's not exactly in accordance with international law. But
there was another clear violation.
But then clearly, whether the outcome is something that we have all tried by other means, yes, that's the outcome we have all tried, that, a dictator, authoritarian regime is actually changed.
But it goes against the principles of sovereignty that European leaders always say they care about.
But this is what exactly I mean, that at the end, after 27 years of all the efforts that Europeans and others have tried to improve situation in Venezuela and to actually change those massive human rights violations, the suppression of democracy, suppression of anything, any human decency, at the end, I think, of course, we have to see how situation develops further, but Venezuelan people seem quite happy with what was done. And let's say, theoretically, we might say it's a violation, but practically the outcome is something that works.
Do you understand the criticism, Foreign Minister Braže, that people have with the implementation of international law by European and Western leaders being very selective and being very hypocritical?
I don't think European leaders are being very selective. They've been very principled, all of us, in terms of evaluating situations. But at the end, yes, we have principles of international law. We have the application of the law. And then there is a real-life situation where, like in Venezuela, if a dictator, authoritarian, who is responsible for deaths of tens of thousands of people, suppression of the whole nation, I think we also have to be realists around that. That maybe not always just the principles matter, but actually the outcomes.
What about the killing that has gone on in Gaza? Why hasn't Europe stood up and defended the human rights?
What do you mean Europe hasn't stood up?
Well, there haven't been sanctions in any way imposed on Israel.
There have been straightforward points on what has been done. Europe has been quite united on a number of issues around that. There are countries with regard to sanctions or other issues that don't think that's the best policy option in that. That's also within the EU on foreign policy and security policy, we take decisions by unanimity.
Can Europe rely on itself to defend not just European territory, but also the Arctic? Or do you agree with the Secretary General of NATO, who said very bluntly that European nations do not have the capability to defend themselves without the United States?
Our recipe for the last, I would say more than 10 years, has been make sure we are strong ourselves, that we invest in our national security and defense. So that's why we have taken decision to raise defense funding to 5%, for internal securities as much, for border security, for cyber, for critical infrastructure. It's the first concern of the country and the population. So our own strengths first. And we very much work towards a decision in The Hague that all allies would commit to 5% of defense spending. And that is the next step, that we need all allies, especially Europeans, who have underinvested for years and years and years and relied on the US guarantees and US defending us, that Europeans, every European nation within NATO and beyond, every like-minded nation, actually strengthens their own strength, their own defense capacity.
But let me ask you, could this over-militarization of the Arctic lead to an escalation of tensions with Russia that could spill over into the Baltic region? Is that a real concern for you?
We don't see it like that. Whether it's on Arctic, whether it's, well, Arctic-Baltic security is actually related. You can't really say that it's separated. You know, when you look at the map and you look at the region, it's all there. But there's always a response to a predictable or real-life threat. It's not just because, you know, somebody says there's a challenge in the Arctic, military challenge, that suddenly something starts happening. There will always be a civil military planning analysis and then responses that are needed. So no, I'm not worried about that.
We are here in the Arctic, which has always been known for its low tension, for its collaboration among all of the nations. It hasn't been the case since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia has been isolated. Is the environment becoming overly politicized?
I think scientific collaboration is still there. I think that's also important for security and defense, because a lot of deterrence can be achieved by making sure that what we do, what we know, how we develop our innovations, whether that's on quantum, whether that's on other technologies, that they are turned into technological superiority over Russia or China. And I think we can do that as Europeans, we can do that as NATO community, and working towards that is crucially important.
But can it be done without Russia? And Russia's
Yes,
contribution? Russia controls over 50% of the Arctic space.
The Russians are doing that themselves, so I mean, it's whether we say it can be done without Russia or not, they are already doing that. But I think for the allies, the crucially important part is, again, taking security defense seriously, but also then our best minds, brightest scientists and their achievements also contributing to our technological superiority and making sure that peace and security remains as we know it. And whether that's in space, whether that's in oceans, whether that's on land, whether that's in various dual-use technologies, is just crucially important.
Foreign Minister Braže, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here in the Arctic, discussions about the outside world and tensions between the world's major powers have taken on a new significant urgency. The High North is no longer a zone of low tension, as it's historically been, with shifting geopolitical currents leading to an unsettling new environment. At stake is the economic and political stability of Arctic nations and their indigenous communities. For the rest of Europe, it is sharpening the debate on how to leverage power and how to stand up to Europe's traditional ally, the United States. From me, Rida Fakhri, and the entire team here in Norway, thanks for watching.